insurance is our lead focus. U.S. Health Secretary Louis Sullivan and 4 experts join us to discuss what's wrong and how to fix it. And a report on the sudden death of press lord Robert Maxwell.
Funding for the NewsHour has been provided by PepsiCo. Every day we enjoy people being cold to us, cutting us up, getting fresh with us, tearing into us, and calling us chicken. In fact, the more people do it, the happier we are. PepsiCo. And by AT&T. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And by the financial support of viewers like you.
Today was Election Day in many parts of the nation. The race for a U.S. Senate seat in Pennsylvania was one of the most closely watched in the off-year elections. It pitted former U.S. Attorney General Dick Thornburgh against Democrat Harris Wofford. Wofford erased a big Thornburgh lead in the closing days of the campaign by stressing support for nationwide health insurance and extended unemployment benefits. In Washington state, voters cast ballots on a referendum to impose term limits on members of Congress as well as state lawmakers. They also voted on a proposed plan to legalize doctor-assisted suicide for the terminally ill. Robin?
The Senate voted this evening to confirm Robert Gates as director of the Central Intelligence Agency. The vote was 64 to 31. During Senate hearings, Gates was questioned about his knowledge of the Iran-Contra affair and about allegations that he slanted intelligence reports during his tenure as CIA deputy director. Some concerns were raised during debate in the Senate earlier this afternoon.
I have an uneasy feeling about Mr. Gates. And I don't think we ought to have that uneasy feeling about whoever heads the CIA. And so, Mr. President, my vote will not be for Mr. Gates as head of the CIA. I think we can do better.
If we're going to have anyone that's never made any mistakes, we have to find someone who's never made a decision, never written an article, never taken a controversial stand, never taken a risk. That's really not what we want in positions of responsibility in our government.
This is the second time Gates has been nominated for the CIA post. He withdrew his name in 1987 because questions were raised about his role in the Iran-Contra affair. He denied any knowledge about the diversion of funds from the Iran arms sales to the Nicaraguan Contras.
The cost of a first-class stamp won't be going up anytime soon. The Postal Service Board of Governors today vetoed a proposed 1-cent increase to 30 cents. But the nation's Postmaster General said holding the line now could mean the next increase could come sooner, in 1994 rather than 1995. He said that increase could be as much as a nickel. The productivity of American workers is on the rise again. The Labor Department said today that worker productivity rose at an annual rate of 2.4% in the July to September quarter, following a decline the previous quarter. It was the best productivity performance in 3 years. But economists said that it was due to the fact that fewer people were holding jobs.
The Bush administration today proposed measures to reduce health care costs. They included computerizing medical records and the introduction of a health insurance card, similar to automatic teller cards used at banks. The proposals followed a meeting with representatives of the medical profession and the insurance industry in Washington this morning. At a news conference later, Health Secretary Dr. Louis Sullivan said the goal was to slash the red tape Americans face in obtaining health care.
Americans should go to the doctor to be cured of their illnesses, not to be made sick by the paperwork. These goals and changes will mean improvements, less hassle, savings in our healthcare system. Now, it doesn't mean that all of our healthcare problems are solved, but it does mean that those of us in government and in the private sector have taken an important step forward, and a step to improve the system.
Dr. Sullivan and critics of his plan will join us right after the news summary.
Government officials told a congressional hearing today that there was little evidence that missing U.S. servicemen were being held against their will in Vietnam. 2,273 servicemen are still officially listed as missing in action from the Vietnam War. Defense Secretary Dick Cheney said it was a top priority of the government to follow up on reports of live sightings, but he said solid information was slow in coming. The president's special envoy to Indochina on POW MIA matters, also testified. Retired U.S. Army General John Vesey said his 4 years in that job have been difficult.
Every time I've said it could be resolved over months, it has taken years, and it always turns out to be harder than we thought it would be. I would say I've come to the conclusion that the probability of there being live Americans is that the probability is considerably lower than I thought it was when I took on the job in 1987.
The Chinese news agency today announced a normalization of relations between China and Vietnam. Friction between the countries developed in the 1970s as Vietnam grew closer to the Soviet Union, and because of Vietnam's 1978 invasion of Cambodia, which toppled the Chinese-backed government there. Officials said the new relationship would be based on trade and economic cooperation.
The Soviet Union said today it would open its entire territory to overflights by spy planes. The announcement reversed a decades-old policy. It also removed a major obstacle to the so-called open skies that would allow former Cold War adversaries to overfly each other's territory to verify arms control agreements. Also today, President Gorbachev met in Moscow with U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense Donald Atwood. Gorbachev proposed that the U.S. and Soviet Union share technology on eliminating chemical weapons and jointly produce military equipment. Atwood was in Moscow to look for ways the U.S. can help the Soviets convert military facilities to civilian use. Secretary of State Baker said today he hoped Israel and its Arab neighbors would decide within the next 2 weeks where to convene the next round of peace talks. He said if the two sides could not choose a location, the United States had some proposals. Mr. Baker also said the U.S. would mediate differences between Israel and Syria if necessary. He made his remarks during a White House briefing.
We have offered ourselves as honest brokers, and we have said that we would be willing, if the parties wanted us to, even to participate in the talks themselves, that we would hope they could make progress in just direct bilateral talks between the two sides. If they can't and they want us there, we will be there. We would be pleased if they wanted us to submit ideas and suggestions. If they came to us, we've got some, and we would be pleased to submit those whether we were in the room or not. It's really up to the parties, though.
Baker also criticized Israel for opening a new settlement in the Golan Heights yesterday. He said it was hard for us to see how it would help the peace process. Another ceasefire was declared in Yugoslavia today. It came at a European Community Peace Conference in The Hague. But the hardline Serbian Republic flatly rejected the EC's plan for a permanent settlement. That plan would turn Yugoslavia into a loose association of independent states. And back in Yugoslavia, Croatian forces reportedly attacked Serbian territory for the first time since the fighting began. Serbian officials said 4 people died in the attack.
Former Philippine First Lady Imelda Marcos surrendered today to authorities in Manila to face tax fraud charges. She appeared in the office of a Philippine judge to be fingerprinted and to post $2,700 bond for her release. She returned to the Philippines yesterday after nearly 6 years in exile. The Aquino government permitted her return on the condition that she agree to face the tax charges.
British publisher Robert Maxwell was found dead today in the Atlantic Ocean near the Canary Islands. The body of the 68-year-old billionaire was located hours after he was reported missing from his yacht. An executive with one of Maxwell's companies said there was no indication of foul play. Maxwell is perhaps best known in this country for his recent acquisition of the financially troubled New York Daily News. His other holdings include several British tabloids, including the Daily Mirror, Britain's second-largest newspaper. We'll have more on Maxwell later in the program. But first, a debate on health insurance, and we'll close with a special portrait of a portrait painter. The administration proposal to change medical insurance billing is our lead story tonight. The skyrocketing costs of insurance have left over 32 million Americans uninsured and made health benefits the single most important issue for many labor organizations. Health coverage has taken center stage in today's closely watched Senate race in Pennsylvania. There are increasing calls for radical health reform in Congress. Several Democratic bills have called for a national health plan modeled after the Canadian system. in which the government acts as the insurer for everyone. 2 recent studies added momentum to that push. The General Accounting Office reported in June that switching to a Canadian-style plan would save enough money to provide health care to all Americans, including the millions now without insurance. And the New England Journal of Medicine ran an article concluding that up to 24% of U.S. health costs went to administrative costs, as compared to 11% in Canada. Against that background, Secretary Sullivan offered a plan today to eliminate paperwork by linking all insurance companies by a single computer system. People covered by any insurance company would present a magnetic insurance card whenever they received care.
Every American patient will need only to present a health insurance card issued by a private or a government plan to a hospital or presented to a doctor. Patients will know how much their insurance will pay and what costs they are responsible for. Secondly, we're moving towards a computerized healthcare record so that patients don't have to remember and don't have to repeat their medical history as they move through the system, from primary care physician to specialist. Doctors and hospitals will have the key medical information they need to care for a patient when and where they need it. Ultimately, patients should not have to fill out insurance forms. Now, recent reports have suggested that most of our administrative costs are wasted and could be harvested by a Canadian single-payer system to pay for health care for those Americans currently without insurance. While we identified areas where savings could be achieved, these recent reports are outrageously misleading. While they resonate with public opinion that seeks simple villains for the health care expenditure crisis, we cannot promise the American people a simple solution to this difficult and complex problem. We should not lead Americans to believe that insuring the uninsured would be cost-free.
Secretary Sullivan will be joining us later in the program.
Now to the views of 4 people monitoring Secretary Sullivan's proposals. Carl Schramm is the president of the Health Insurance Association of America, the largest organization representing the health insurance industry. Mr. Schramm was among those who met with Secretary Sullivan today. Robert Leshesky is the executive vice president of the Liberty Mutual Insurance Group in Boston, Massachusetts. Mr. Leshesky also attended today's meeting. Dr. David Himmelstein is the national coordinator of Physicians for a National Health Program. He is the co-author of the New England Journal of Medicine article. Dr. Himmelstein joins us tonight from Boston. And Paul Starr is an editor of the journal The American Prospect and is the author of a Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Social Transformation of American Medicine. He is a professor of sociology at Princeton University. Gentlemen, before we get to some of the broader problems and solutions that I know some of you want to talk about, let's talk specifically about what Secretary Sullivan and the group you met with today were proposing. And I want to come to you first, Dr. Himmelstein. Is this the important step forward to improve the health system in this country that Secretary Sullivan says that it is?
Hardly. This is really a poorly conceived gimmick that's a poor substitute for the national health insurance program that our country really needs. We've made some quick estimates, and our estimate is the Secretary's proposal doesn't get any more than 10% of the potential administrative savings that one could get in the healthcare system. We can save $100 billion a year on bureaucracy in our system, but only if we're willing to do away with the private health insurance industry. They keep 15 cents of every premium dollar for their overhead and profits, and we could reduce that to 1 cent on the dollar by going to a national health insurance program. So this is not nearly the reform that's needed.
Mr. Schramm, you represent the health insurance industry. I assume you don't agree with that, but what about Dr. Himmelstein's characterization that this is just a poorly conceived gimmick? It gets 10% savings when we could get much more.
Well, I think it's something of an outrage to declare the leadership of Secretary Sullivan today to, in earnest, move the ball forward to what our ultimate goal is, and that's 100% coverage of every American, as a gimmick. I think the Secretary is genuinely convinced that what we've done in the past in terms of covering now almost 225 million Americans through private and public insurance has been a great job, and it is. Most Americans know that. The task for the decade ahead is to reach to the 31 million people who don't have health insurance, and that's what today's summit was about, I think. It was talking about the administrative costs that are involved in reaching that ultimate goal. And it seems to me that that's what the task is, and a radical proposal to replace what exists in America and works well with the Canadian system is incredibly poorly conceived.
Well, before we get to the Canadian system, specifically, how does issuing one card to everybody take care of those 31, 32 million Americans who don't have health insurance right now?
Well, the vision...
Most of them children, is that right? Or many of them?
No, I think the proportion of kids is represented about equally in that population. The vision, Judy, was and is that by the end of the next decade, every American will have a card. That means every single American will have some mechanism to pay. Now, those cards will be issued by private insurance companies and Blue Cross plans and HMOs, as well as Medicaid agencies and the Medicare agency. And I think the vision that the Secretary worked on today and brought all the leaders from the provider community, from the insurance community, and from various important parts of the government is devised specifically to advance insurance to everybody. And that's the goal, I think, that Dr. Himmelstein is focused on as well. It is the genuine goal that we all share.
But again, how does issuing one card to everybody then cover those who are uninsured? Those who can't afford to pay for insurance now, how are they suddenly going to be able to pay for it?
Well, Judy, what it means is that both the government and private insurers are going to have to stretch to get to the goal of coverage. We have to stretch in the next 10 years to make sure that all these 31 million people have coverage. Now, what it means is that we are in fact going to have to commit more taxes to the Medicaid program, and that the insurance companies are in fact going to have to cover more people who are not currently insured. I think this is a stretch both on the public side and the private side to get to the goal of universal coverage in 10 years.
Paul Starr, you've written extensively on this subject. Is what happened today going to go far enough? Does this do what ought to be done at this point?
No, it really doesn't begin to do that. I would say that the Secretary was papering over the problem, except that he seems determined to laminate over it. There are really three big facts that ought to be focused on. First, Americans pay much more than people in other countries for health care. We spend about 12% of our national income on health care compared to 8 or 9% in other countries. Secondly, we have more people uninsured than in those other countries. And third, we have the deepest and broadest public dissatisfaction about health care. This measure does not begin to address the depth of that problem.
And now let me come to you, Mr. Leshevsky. You also represent the health insurance industry. You were in that meeting today. Which side do you fall on in this argument?
Well, I think there's a lot of good news and there's a lot of continuing frustration. I've been in this business for 20 years and I've never seen hospital groups, physician groups, insurance companies, government coming together and instead of pointing the fingers at one another, cooperating to solve the problem. I think that's the good news. I'd like to see this go forward even faster than the plans have been laid out. But there's some good news there, and I think that's a positive.
Because right now we're talking about a 10-year.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we have to recognize that solving the problem of administrative costs in the private sector is an important problem. But this healthcare crisis is driven, depending upon how you dissect it, by 8 or 10 or 12 problems, all these drivers that are pushing healthcare costs up. And as we drive these costs up, people can't afford health insurance. That's why we have so many uninsured. So clearly, this is an important step. It's a very positive step in terms of solving that administrative problem. But there are so many other things out there right now that are going to be necessary if we're going to hit that goal of seeing everyone insured.
Mr. Schramm, here's someone in the industry saying this is okay, but it's not nearly enough.
Well, I don't think Bob said it's not nearly enough. Bob said he'd like to see it move faster, and I think from Bob's individual perspective, that's right. But we ought to be clear about what was committed to today, Judy. We said that by the next 5 years, we would move all, or 50% of all of our claims would go electronically. Now, that is estimated by the Secretary to save $8 billion a year for the next 5 years. That's an important first step, but it is just a first step. I think what Bob pointed out was that for the first time, we have seen under the Secretary's flag all the major parties sit
he
down
made that point, right.
and commit to coverage for everybody.
Well, and they did come together. Let me come back to you, Dr. Himmelstein. Isn't it significant, as Mr. Schramm says, that you can save under this proposal $8 billion a year?
Well, that's $8 billion when we could actually save $100 billion. And basically what we have is two desperate groups, an administration that has no health policy, and an insurance industry that's trying to protect the 15 cents it takes out of every healthcare dollar, trying to stave off change. They're giving scraps from the table, trying to get publicity for it, and trying to stop the drive for national health insurance. But really what they're offering, as you've already shown, doesn't do anything for the uninsured, doesn't do anything for Americans who already have insurance and are facing rising costs. In fact, 60 or 70 million Americans have insurance, but coverage that's so inadequate that they would be bankrupted by an illness despite it. And this program doesn't do a thing for those people.
What about that, Mr. Schramm?
Well, I think Dr. Himmelstein has said several things that really bear some examination. First, his continued allegation of these $100 billion in costs. Now, in last week's New England Journal of Medicine, his colleagues just ripped that study to pieces. There is no foundation for that.
Carl, most of those letters, in fact, came from your colleagues. The insurance industry wrote most of those letters. Our article was peer-reviewed by our colleagues before it was published, and by some of the leading health economists in the country who agreed with it.
Michael, we have every single one of these letters takes your study apart, including letters by academic physicians. I think the point is there are administrative costs in the system, and Dr. Himmelstein's right about that, and we focused on those questions today. And I think that really is what bears evidence. The steps that were taken today go precisely to the reasoned, pragmatic steps that have to be taken to purge the unnecessary costs that exist in this system. And that was the commitment today. That's a very positive step.
Do you accept the 15 cents on the dollar figure that he's cited several times?
It's another mistaken statistic from Dr. Himmelstein.
What is
that statistic comes from the Secretary's own department. The Office of the Actuary of the Healthcare Financing Administration is who gives those figures.
Well, the Healthcare Finance Administration says that it's 13 cents, and 3 cents of that is the monies that we pay out in state and federal taxes. The net cost of administering this system from the insurance perspective is 10 cents on the dollar. But the important thing is there is value connected to those 10 cents. For example, some of that money we spend in fraud and abuse, monitoring physician excessive...
Fraud and abuse on the part of
physicians and hospitals. And Judy, when we spend $1 in finding fraud in the claims process, we can save $5 for the consumer. So it's absolutely wrong to paint all of these costs as waste or profit, or monies that don't go back to consumers as value added.
I want to come back to you, Mr. Starr. I mentioned earlier, you've written extensively on this. If you say, as you said a moment ago, that this is just a very tentative step, that much more needs to be done, what are the concrete steps that you see the government taking either through congressional action or executive action in the immediate future to begin to get at this problem?
Well, I think we need to move to the point where the insurance industry has come to accept that there will be a framework of national health insurance that they must work within. And I hope that Dr. Himmelstein and his colleagues generate so much support for a Canadian-style system that by the time the insurance industry gets dragged to the negotiating table, it is ready to accept the kind of plan that Senators Bob Kerrey or Harris Wofford would at that point offer them, a plan which would offer them a much diminished role, but a role nonetheless, offering supplementary insurance, providing quality assurance, running some health maintenance organizations and managed care plans under the umbrella of a national health plan that guarantees the American people control over health care costs and choice of physician. One of the things that's happening, Judy, today is that an increasing number of Americans are being denied the choices they used to have. They're losing benefits. They have less choice. They're being thrown into health plans that no longer give them choice of doctor. And one of the things that a health insurance system can achieve is actually preserving liberty as well as assuring security for the American people.
What about that, Mr. Olszewski?
Well, I think what it really comes down to is the issue isn't necessarily over who says how much we have in administrative charges. I think that we all know the administrative overhead is too large and needs to be cut down. Everyone's agreed to that. I think fundamentally this debate is over bringing costs under control, and we can't lose sight of that. How are we going to bring costs under control? Healthcare costs are going up at $200 million a day, more than they were a year ago. Do we believe that that one plan and in a situation where the budget is out of control, healthcare costs are out of control, do we simply put in a program with 1% administrative overhead and expect suddenly we're going to have controls and we're going to pay for that because we got rid of the insurance forms? When I look at what's going on, I don't see people wanting more government. I think they still have confidence in the private sector. I think that the
you think
consumer
there's a
is
role for the insurance
I think the consumer is angry.
This, which is what Dr. Himmelstein is saying.
Well, I think the consumer is often angry at our industry because we haven't brought the forces, the private sector, the efficiency we're supposed to be known for to bear. And administration is a good example of that.
Dr. Himmelstein, that is true, isn't it? I mean, should the industry be given a chance to clean up its act, so to speak, to find savings that haven't been found in the past?
The industry's had 50 years to to clean up its act. We've been waiting for 50 years for private health insurance to do the job, and they haven't. In fact, we've had 20 years of policies supposedly focused on cost containment that, according to Mr. Schramm, ought to have really contained costs by now. It's not happening. Costs are rising as fast today as at any time in the past, and we've had years of verbiage and no results. It's time that we cover all Americans and we contain costs. We know it can be done. Every other nation in Western Europe and in North America has in fact done that. The block at this point is the private health insurance industry.
You're the obstacle, he's saying. Your industry is the obstacle, not you personally.
He misrepresents the history. 50 years ago in 1940, 12 million Americans were covered by private health insurance. We now cover 185 million Americans. I think that's an incredibly persuasive record that says we have been able to grow. The last 10 years has been the problem when we haven't been able to grow the coverage. And I think today's focus has been exactly on the question of what it is that is a bar to the continued growth of a user-friendly health insurance system.
You're nodding your head.
Well, I think the real issue here is if this issue comes down to whether we have, it is entirely over whether it's private sector insurance or government sector insurance, I think we've really missed the point. What's driving these health care costs up? It's the raw material cost. You've got a malpractice crisis in Massachusetts. The average obstetrician pays $35,000 a year for malpractice insurance. 2/3 of malpractice dollars go to lawyers and overhead. Nationalize the system. That hasn't changed. We've got, right now, only 45% of the poor are covered by Medicaid. Nationalize the system. That hasn't changed until you really can deal with that.
All right, what about that,
So there are all of these fundamental drivers that we've got to deal with. And if you want to blame the insurance companies, fine. I'll take the blame for what insurance companies don't do well. We've got to improve administration. We've got to improve certain underwriting. But there are all the other issues that we've got to get at.
All right, Dr. Himmelstein, you want to respond to that?
Well, the fundamental driver and problem is that we have a completely disjointed non-system of care, and our private insurance companies waste enormous amounts. So malpractice costs, an obstetrician may pay $35,000, but that's out of an income of $350,000. So that's hardly a substantial cost. In fact, if we had a national health insurance program, as Canada has had now for 25 years, we could contain the cost, both because of the administrative savings and because of the improved efficiency and planning that such a program allows.
You're both shaking your
heads. I mean, magic bullets. I mean, give me a break.
That is a magic bullet, as Bob says. The rate of inflation
What's a magic bullet? You mean
going to Canada.
Where you have a government-paid system.
That's right. The rate of inflation in the Canadian budget for the National Health Insurance Program is running almost twice the rate of inflation of our incredibly high rate of inflation.
Right.
And the real question has to come around to questions like Bob has said, the inputs. We have to ask Dr. Himmelstein, as a physician, how it is that he overlooks totally questions and problems that have been raised repeatedly in the New England Journal of Medicine. For example, it is estimated in the New England Journal of Medicine conservatively that 20% of the surgery accomplished in America today was clinically unnecessary. Now, what are we going to do about that?
All right, Dr. Himmelstein, you want to respond to that? You and both, and Mr. Starr both.
Absolutely true, and that's something we definitely need to approach, and the Canadian system gives you a much better method of approaching that. In fact, Canada has substantially lower rates of unnecessary surgery than we do, according to the data that's beginning to come out, and clearly that is an area we need to approach.
So we bring in a Canadian system and we spend 1% on administration, and suddenly the physicians start practicing differently, and they're only doing 80% of what they were doing before.
Mr. Starr, what about that?
Well, it's not just Canada. There are examples from all over the world, from Western Europe and from our own country, of healthcare systems that are performing much more efficiently and much more equitably than the one we have. And I think these representatives of the health insurance industry are just throwing up a smoke screen to avoid confronting that fact. The kind of change we need is very fundamental. They are not prepared to deal with it. I think today's announcement of this health card is really an example of that, to offer the millions of people in this country who have no insurance or who have lousy insurance or who are worried that any day they might lose their insurance if they lose their job or if their husband dies, to offer these people a card that provides them no economic protection is almost an insult.
Well, that's really the question, Mr. Schramm, I was trying to pose in the beginning. How does issuing the card offer protection that is not now there?
The card represents a contract. This is not some chimera. This is a real card that any person in the country can take to a hospital or a doctor, present it, and be cared for.
Who's going to pay those bills for the 30 million people who are not now covered by insurance?
It is certain that we are going to have to increase taxes to do that in part, and also insurance companies will have to widen their coverage. I should say
so the taxpayer picks up part of
that's right, Judy, and it's very important when people talk about government's commitment to these programs, we look at our own American experience and watch how fickle it has been. A large portion of the people without insurance used to be covered under Medicaid. In 1965, we covered 65% of the poverty population. We're now down to 38%. I'm not sure the average American wants that type of promise from government.
Just quickly, Dr. Himmelstein, you want to respond to that point?
Well, Medicaid is a program for poor people, and programs for poor people tend to be poor programs. What we're advocating is a system that would cover the rich as well as the poor, and if you're on an ocean liner and looking for a lifeboat, go in the first-class lifeboat. We'd like Mr. Schramm and his colleagues to be in that same lifeboat with the rest of us for their health insurance.
Mr. Starr, we're going to be going to Secretary Sullivan next, but I want to ask you, as someone who's been advising Harris Wofford, the Democratic candidate for the Senate, incumbent and the Democratic candidate in Pennsylvania.
I spoke with him just for a few hours. I'm not a close advisor.
All right, I won't exaggerate that, but as someone who's at least has observed that contest, what would you say the message there is in terms of what the public's attitude is about this whole issue?
I think the public anxiety is growing because all the trends are in the wrong direction. In the 1950s, people were seeing their health insurance benefits expanded. Now they're seeing them eroded. They can see that this system, far from developing and maturing the way Mr. Schramm would like it to be, is in fact disintegrating, collapsing from within. And that the public knows from its own experience.
You want to respond to that, Mr. Schramm, quickly?
Oh, surely. I hardly think that's an accurate characterization. We have in the last year added yet again another 2 million people to the rolls of insurance. This is hardly a system collapsing from within. We are growing. The issue is we're not growing fast enough to reach the entire population.
Mr. Starr, he says it's not collapsing, it's growing.
Well, the fact is millions of middle-class people are now being exposed to financial anxieties which they never thought they would have to face. And costs are going out of control. Businesses are using one or another technique to cut back those benefits. That's why health insurance is the principal cause of strikes today. That is simply not something he can talk around.
All right, we're going to thank you all at this point. Mr. Starr, Dr. Himmelstein, Mr. Schramm, Mr. Leszewski. Robin.
Secretary Sullivan has been listening to this discussion and joins us now. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
You've been listening to this, and you've heard the critics describe your program as a gimmick, as an insult, as papering over the problem. How do you respond to that?
I think there has been a very clear misunderstanding what our forum was about today. At that forum today, and in my press statement afterwards, I indicated that we focused on a very narrow part of the problem. In no way, and at no time, did I ever say or hint that this was the answer to the whole healthcare problem. To the contrary, I repeatedly emphasize that this is the case, and I think that much of this discussion has been a misrepresentation of what the conference was all about.
So Mr. Schramm was wrong when he said that by offering this card, implicit in that promise is that at least in 10 years, every American is going to have health coverage.
No. Let me say what I want to say. No, Mr. Schramm is correct. But what I'm saying is this: the statements that were made that this was a gimmick, or this was offering too little too late, or that this was not a substitute for a national health care plan. Indeed, what I'm saying is that this was not intended, nor was it stated that this was the answer. We're focusing on a narrow issue. I stated that on September 23rd when I indicated we would call this forum. There are many components to our health care system. We have a $670 billion industry that takes care of 12% of our gross national product. So I simply want to set the record straight that by no means was the conference today intended to cover the whole issue of our healthcare system.
Well, might not people listening to defenders of today's proposal from the insurance industry, might they not think that you've come up with a plan that's going to provide everybody who doesn't have it now with health care coverage by giving them a card which either is backed by private insurance which they can afford or by government with tax monies if they can't?
Oh, what we were saying today was how do we develop an infrastructure to get us to the goal of having that administrative system that would support whatever the mechanism is for providing and financing health care. That's what the focus was about today. We have a number of things that really are more central to, I think, much of the discussion offered by Dr. Himmelstein and Mr. Starr today. But what I'm saying is that their characterization of this as a substitute for a national plan is off base. This was never intended, nor was it purported to be a national plan.
So what are you offering people who either can't afford private health insurance now or who get dropped by private insurers when they get a serious illness? What is the administration offering them now?
What we have proposed are several things as immediate steps now. First of all, I've stated repeatedly, we need to develop a national consensus. That consensus will be developed, and the American people will only be served if we give them accurate information and not really engage in ideologic rhetoric. What I have stated in the past is this: we need to reform the small market for health insurance. We need to promote managed care. We need to work to streamline administrative systems. We need to promote healthier behavior on the part of our citizens. These and other things. Now, the administrative issue that I just mentioned was what today's forum was all about. What is the ideal situation that we can look forward to, that we have the capability of moving toward, to give us that support for decreasing administrative costs, increasing efficiency, and saving dollars? Well, that has not had anything to do with issues such as managed care, or small market reform, etc. What we said today was that whatever the mechanism for financing care is, that mechanism could be handled by having such an infrastructure, whether that payment is from federal government, state government, private sector insurance, nonprofit insurance, whatsoever. So that's really what today's conference was all about. It is in the statements I gave to the press today. Those who would take the time to read it, I think, would understand that we want to get beyond rhetoric on false issues.
Is the administration saying that the only thing wrong with private health insurance at the moment is duplication in paperwork?
Oh, no, not at all. No, what we are saying and what we said today is this. This is a narrow part of the problem. The many other issues we are working to deal with, and if we are successful in coming to agreement on working together on these issues, then certainly we can expand that effort to work together on additional issues. What we had to say today was very important and was very historic, but it must not be distorted. This is talking about a system that we can all work toward to give the infrastructure for greater efficiency and saving administrative costs.
You repeatedly warn against the dangers of radical solutions, magic bullets, going to other systems like the Canadian system. You did again today in making your statement. But what does this administration propose to fix this system?
Well, let me say why we indicate that. I've talked to officials in Canada, health officials, repeatedly, and what they tell me is that Americans seem to be more enamored of their system than they are themselves. They have, indeed, a system that has some strengths in it, without question, but it also has flaws. Waiting lists. We have citizens from Canada who come to the United States for care because they can't wait or refuse to wait for it there. When the Canadian system was implemented in Canada in the early 60s, there were doctor strikes. They lost physicians who came to the United States or went to Australia or to New Zealand. We are a country of 250 million people, a complex, heterogeneous society, not a small country with 25 million people and a homogeneous society as Canada has. We have another example of the state in Seattle, Washington, in March of 1989, when the University of Washington signed a contract with the Vancouver, British Columbia, to provide coronary bypass surgery for those Canadians on a waiting list. There were 750 people waiting. There have been press reports of people not being able to get simple imaging techniques in Canada for brain tumors. So those things are ignored by those who idealize the Canadian system. And what I have said repeatedly is this: we have many strengths in our system. We have deficiencies that must be addressed. We want to work to address those deficiencies, but to build on the strength in our system and not overthrow a system that has brought us really the most remarkable medical advances in the world.
Let me ask you this quickly and finally. Many commentators, especially this week, see the political tide rising so fast on this issue. And I want to ask you, is the administration going to be able to get through the '92 election without a comprehensive, even radical proposal of its own to meet all these other proposals that are coming?
Robin, we're working very hard towards that goal. We are committed to coming forward with a reasonable, workable plan that will meet the needs of the American people. But we must not be stampeded into intemperate, rash decisions, because in March of 1989, after I was sworn in as secretary, one of the first crises I confronted was the effort underway to repeal the catastrophic care bill passed by the Congress just a few months before. That was a debacle. We do not want to have a repeat of a debacle that will ill-serve the needs of our citizens by having those individuals who would give an idealized picture, not give the complete picture, distort things, and mislead the American public into making wrong decisions.
All right.
We are committed, and we will be having a plan that I believe will serve the American people well.
When will that come? Just briefly, in a word.
The President is the leader of our administration, and he will be making that decision.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us.
Still ahead on the NewsHour, the career of Robert Maxwell and essayist Amai Wallach. Next tonight, the sudden death of British press lord Robert Maxwell. He drowned today in the Atlantic Ocean, apparently after falling off his luxury yacht near the Canary Islands. Maxwell founded a billion-dollar international publishing empire that included the New York Daily News. But his reputation and his legend was built in post-war England. We have a report from Nick Glass of International Television News.
Robert Maxwell's yacht, Lady Ghislaine, from which he was reported missing, lost overboard in the sea off the Canaries in the early hours. The yacht's captain raised the alarm after ringing Mr. Maxwell's room and getting no reply.
He was last seen at 4:45 in the morning, and it would appear that they'd gone to look for him at about midday, and he wasn't there. The ship is now at anchor off of the Spanish port, and the captain of the ship is being interviewed by the local Guardia.
What we know is that Mr. Maxwell has disappeared. Sadly, he was missing. It's now been at least 6 and perhaps 12 hours since he disappeared. He's a 68-year-old man, albeit a very strong and physically fit 60-year-old. The waters in the Atlantic, although they're in the Canaries, they're still pretty cold.
Born Jan Ludwig Hock in Czechoslovakia, Robert Maxwell's vision was always single-minded. After winning a military cross during the war, he settled in Britain and focused his energies on building a business empire. Not everyone approved of his methods. A DTI inquiry in 1971 said he wasn't a person who could be relied on to exercise proper stewardship. Mr. Maxwell started out in scientific publications, and the companies and the publications just grew and grew. The Daily Mirror Group was acquired in 1984, and it remained his most successful publishing adventure.
I may have spent £120 million to buy the Mirror and its sister papers, but I can't buy a single Mirror reader or tell them anything. Their loyalty can only be gained every day by the quality of our newspapers.
Robert Maxwell has had several public places over the years, Labour MP in the 60s, avid football supporter, and a man who could afford to buy clubs, Derby County and Oxford United. But in recent months, he was probably been more in the news than even he would have liked. There were allegations made in a recent book by the investigative journalist Seymour M. Hersh. The book claimed that Mr. Maxwell and the foreign editor of the Daily Mirror, Nicholas Davis, had close links with Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency. All the claims were rejected, and libel writs issued by Mr. Maxwell, Mr. Davis, and the Mirror Group. And then there was the insistent speculation about the financial situation of the Maxwell empire.
His quoted vehicles, Maxwell Communications, we estimate to have net debt in excess of £1 billion, and Mirror Group is much less indebted. It has debt of just over £300 million. And there has certainly been a degree of uncertainty in the market as to the level of debt that he may have personally outside the publicly quoted vehicles. Robert Maxwell owns majority stakes both in MCC and Mirror Group. However, the ultimate ownership goes back to a charitable trust in Liechtenstein, and I don't think anyone is really too sure what the ownership of that is.
What's the advantage of having that kind of arrangement?
It's very secretive.
Robert Maxwell's son, Kevin, was tonight named as acting chairman of Maxwell Communications, and another son, Ian, acting chairman of the Mirror Group.
Maxwell's death has created confusion in this country as well. At the New York Daily News, which he bought last March after a bitter strike and almost killed it, a spokesman said there's concern about the future around here. Under Maxwell, the News had lured back some of the readers and advertisers it lost during the strike, but it was still losing almost $1 million a year. Shortly after he succeeded in cutting a deal with the newspaper's angry union members, Robert Maxwell talked with Charlene Hunter-Gault. He told her what he thought the major lesson of the agreement was.
Collective bargaining in the United States, which was on the way to dying, has been restored in this instance. The Tribune wanted to abolish collective bargaining, and the unions responded by a crippling and destructive strike. The paper would have died, all the jobs would have been lost, Tribune would have lost a lot of money. Being brought in by Tribune in the unions, I restored by collective bargaining that we reached agreement. And therefore, never again ought we to have a similar situation anywhere in the United States. You take Eastern Airlines. Collective bargaining was thrown out of the window and it was destroyed. Many other examples. So that's the first thing. Second thing it has proved is that the unions recognize that they have a major responsibility that this newspaper got into those kind of troubles. They blame it on Tribune, but they know in their heart of hearts a lot of the feather bedding, a lot of unnecessary expenditure has been the cause for destroying so many newspapers in this town. So collective bargaining and the unions must abandon feather bedding practices.
Do you think that this...
And management must abandon saying that the trade unions don't matter.
Robert Maxwell was 68 years old.
Finally tonight, an essay by Jim Fisher about an unusual landmark.
The 1991 harvest in the Middle West is mostly over now. Wheat fields swept clean months ago, beans and milo almost done. Corn? Here in parts of Missouri, there was no corn. What was green and elephant high in late June shriveled amid 2 months of searing drought. What made 150 bushels last year was lucky to make 30 this year, or less. What didn't make feed corn ended up as silage, livestock fodder packed and bulldozed into pits. That's the method now, cheaper, easier to get to. The old way, silos, has largely disappeared. Oh, silos are still around. Big blue harvest stores, a way to spot a dairy farm from miles away. But there are thousands of other empty silos dotting the land, remnants of a time before government storage, sell-today futures markets, and specialized farming. They are obdurate structures from an era when general farming was the rule. You had a farm, you had a silo. Most of them were made out of hollow red tile, like this one east of Knob Noster, Missouri. It was used from about 1910 until the late 1940s, when it was found to wobble, then abandoned. Too expensive to fix, even to tear down. But just another old, empty silo? Not quite. This is probably one of the best-known silos in America. Why? There's a tree growing out of the top of it. That's right, a mulberry, growing straight as a stovepipe, 35 feet to the lip of the silo, then spreading its branches beyond. The owners of the silo and the well-known tree are the Thompsons, who run beef cattle and don't use the big structure. Not surprisingly, the tree in the silo keeps Chester, 77, answering questions.
When it started coming out the top, people started asking about it. What's coming out of that tree, out of the silo? And I said, well, it's a tree. And sure enough, when it got out a little further, and people would say, why, did you plant it? And I said, no. It's just an old mulberry tree, and I always said the birds planted it.
Except you won't find the tree on a state tourist map. Too corny, too country, hardly slick enough these days to compete with a theme park or Major League Baseball. Yet perhaps not. People who stop seem to know the tree is special, rising towards the sky over the years, energized by just enough sun that came through the rotted-off drain doors. Nature, resilient, looking for an opening, wondrous in its adaptability, took a tiny seed and wrought a sort of miracle. Passerby see the tree and come knocking at Chester and Ruth's door, marveling not only at the tree, but also the silo that stood in the blistering heat and freezing cold of Missouri for 9 decades. Its tiles cracked, its cement flaky, but still strong enough to enfold the tree, to be part of what's become a landmark amidst the surrounding farmland. In a way, part of the miracle was Chester. He could have grubbed out the seedling, chopped down the sapling, used the grown tree for firewood. No way.
Today, we have a very special book because it's about a place in Knob Noster.
Now the story is in a coloring book, one called Martha Mulberry, which brought a passel of kids to the local school library.
How many of you know where this unusual place is in Knob Noster?
Yes. That's where my uncle is, and there's a tree growing out of the silo.
An ordinary thing, a bunch of school kids coloring in books, bright Crayolas filling pictures of what an old farm couple has preserved over the years. Generations linked by a simple yet remarkable thing, a mulberry tree in a farm silo. I'm Jim Fisher.
Again, the main stories of this election day, voters cast their ballots on controversial issues ranging from euthanasia to term limits. And tonight, the Senate voted to confirm Robert Gates as CIA director. The vote was 64-31. Good night, Robin.
Good night, Judy. That's the News Hour for tonight. We're sorry we were unable to bring you Am I Wallach's essay as promised. We'll reschedule it soon, and we'll be back tomorrow night with a look at the results of today's elections. I'm Robert MacNeil. Good night.
Funding for the News Hour has been provided by AT&T. AT&T has supported the MacNeil-Lehrer News Hour since 1983 because quality information and quality communication is our idea of a good connection. AT&T, the right choice. And by PepsiCo. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And by the financial support of viewers like you.
Is K2 taller than Everest? Find out on Nova next, here on the television stations of OPB.
Due to illness, Alistair Cook's upcoming Linfield College appearance has been canceled.
Video cassettes of the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour are available from PBS Video. Call 1-800-328-PBS-1.
This is PBS.